Book 4, Chapter 10 of the Adventures of Gil Blas of Santillane by Alain René Lesage, translated by Tobias Smollett. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Book 4, Chapter 10, The History of Don Alfonso and the Fair Seraphina. I will attempt no disguise from you, my venerable friend, nor from this gentleman who completes my audience. After the generosity of his conduct towards me, I should be in the wrong to distrust him. You shall know my misfortunes from their beginning. I am a native of Madrid, and came into the world mysteriously. An officer of the German guard, Baron Steinbach, by name, returning home one evening, espied a bundle of fair linen at the foot of his staircase. He took it up and carried it to his wife's apartment, where it turned out to be a new-born infant, wrapped up in very handsome swaddling clothes, with a note containing an assurance that it belonged to persons of condition, who would come forward and own it at some future period, and the further information that it had been baptized by the name of Alfonso. I was that unfortunate stranger in the world, and this is all that I know about myself. Whether honor or profligacy was the motive of the exposure, the helpless child was equally the victim. Whether my unhappy mother wanted to get rid of me, to conceal an habitual course of scandalous amours, or whether she had made a single deviation from the path of virtue with a faithless lover, and had been obliged to protect her fame at the expense of nature and the maternal feelings. However this might be, the Baron and his wife were touched by my destitute condition, and resolved, as they had no children of their own, to bring me up under the name of Don Alfonso. As I grew in years and stature, their attachment to me strengthened. My manners, genteel before strangers and affectionate towards them, were the theme of their fondest panegyric. In short, they loved me as if I had been their own. Masters of every description were provided for me. My education became their leading object, and far from waiting impatiently till my parents should come forward, they seemed, on the contrary, to wish that my birth might always remain a mystery. As soon as the Baron thought me old enough to bear arms, he sent me into the service. With my ensign's commission, a genteel and suitable equipment was provided for me, and the more effectually to animate me in the career of glory, my patron pointed out that the path of honour was open to every adventurer, and that the renown of a warrior would be so much the more creditable to me as I should owe it to none but myself. At the same time, he laid open to me the circumstances of my birth, which he had hitherto concealed. As I had passed for his son in Madrid, and had actually thought myself so, it must be owned that this communication gave me some uneasiness. I could not then, nor can I even now, think of it without a sense of shame. In proportion as the innate feelings of a gentleman bear testimony to the birth of one, am I mortified at being rejected and renounced by the unnatural authors of my being. I went to serve in the Low Countries, but peace was concluded in a short time, and Spain finding herself without assailants, though not without assassins, I returned to Madrid, where I received fresh marks of affection from the Baron and his wife. Rather more than 2 months after my return, a little page came into my room one morning, and presented me with a note couched nearly in the following terms: I am neither ugly nor crooked, and yet you often see me at my window without the tribute of a glance. This conduct is little in unison with the spirit of your physiognomy, and so far stings me to revenge that I will make you love me if possible. On the perusal of this epistle there could be no doubt but it came from a widow by name Leonora, who lived opposite our house, and had the character of a very great coquette. Hereupon I examined my little messenger, who had a mind to be on the reserve at first, but a ducat in hand opened the floodgates of his intelligence. He even took charge of an answer to his mistress, confessing my guilt, and intimating that its punishment was far advanced. I was not insensible to a conquest even of this kind. For the rest of the day, home and my window seat were the grand attraction, and the lady seemed to have fallen in love with her window seat too. I made signals, she returned them, and on the very next day sent me word by her little Mercury that if I would be in the street on the following night between 11 and 12, I might converse with her at a window on the ground floor. Though I did not feel myself very much captivated by so coming on a kind of widow, it was impossible not to send such an answer as if I was, and a sort of amorous curiosity made me as impatient as if I had really been in love. In the dusk of the evening I went sauntering up and down the Prado till the hour of assignation. Before I could get to my appointment, a man mounted on a fine horse alighted near me, and coming up with a peremptory air, "Sir," said he, "are not you the son of Baron Steinbach?" I answered in the affirmative. "You are the person then," resumed he, "who were to meet Leonora at her window to-night. I have seen her letters and your answers, her page has put them into my hands, and I have followed you this evening from your own house hither, to let you know you have a rival whose pride is not a little wounded at a competition with yourself in an affair of the heart." It would be unnecessary to say more. We are in a retired place, let us therefore draw, unless, to avoid the chastisement in store for you, you will give me your word to break off all connection with Leonora. Sacrifice in my favour all your hopes and interest, or your life must be the forfeit. It had been better, said I, to have insured my generosity by good manners, than to extort my compliance by menaces. I might have granted to your request what I must refuse to this insolent demand. Well then, resumed he, tying up his horse and preparing for the encounter, let us settle our dispute like men. Little could a person of my condition have stomached the debasement of a request to a man of your quality. 9 out of 10 in my rank would, under such circumstances, have taken their revenge on terms of less honour but more safety. I felt myself exasperated at this last insinuation, so that, seeing he had already drawn his sword, mine did not linger in the scabbard. We fell on one another with so much fury that the engagement did not last long. Whether his attack was made with too much heat, or my skill in fencing was superior, he soon received a mortal wound. He staggered and dropped dead upon the spot. In such a situation, having no alternative but an immediate escape, I mounted the horse of my antagonist, and went off in the direction of Toledo. There was no venturing to return to Baron Steinbach, since, besides the danger of the attempt, the narrative of my adventure from my own mouth would only afflict him the more, so that nothing was so eligible as an immediate decampment from Madrid. During the cut of my own melancholy reflection, I travelled onwards the remainder of the night and all the next morning, but about noon it became necessary to stop, both for the sake of my horse and to avoid the insupportable fierceness of the midday heat. I stayed in a village till sunset, and then, intending to reach Toledo without drawing bit, went on my way. I had already got 2 leagues beyond Illescas when, about midnight, a storm like that of to-day overtook me as I was jogging along the road. There was a garden wall at some little distance, and I rode up to it. For want of any more commodious shelter, my horse's station and my own were arranged, as comfortably as circumstances would admit, near the door of a summer house at the end of the wall, with a balcony over it. Leaning against the door, I discovered it to be open, owing, as I thought, to the negligence of the servants. Having dismounted, less from curiosity than for the sake of a better standing, as the rain had been very troublesome under the balcony, I went into the lower part of the summer house, leading my horse by the bridle. My amusement during the storm was in reconnoitring my quarters, and though I had nothing to form an opinion by but the lurid gleams of the lightning, it was very evident that such a house must belong to some family above the common. I was waiting anxiously till the rain abated to set forward again on my journey, but a great light at a distance made me change my purpose. Leaving my horse in the summer house, with the precaution of fastening the door, I made for the light in the assurance that they were not all gone to bed in the house, and with the intention of requesting a lodging for the night. After crossing several walks, I came to a saloon, and here too the door was left open. On my entrance, from the magnificence so handsomely displayed by the light of a fine crystal lustre, it was easy to conclude that this must be the residence of some illustrious nobleman. The pavement was of marble, the wainscot richly carved and gilt, the proportions of architecture tastefully preserved, and the ceiling evidently adorned by the masterpieces of the first artists in fresco. But what particularly engaged my attention was a great number of busts, and those of Spanish heroes, supported on jasper pedestals and ranged round the saloon. There was opportunity enough for examining all this splendour, since there was not even a footfall, nor the shadow of any one gliding along the passage, though my ears and eyes were incessantly on the watch for some inhabitant of this fairy desert. On one side of the saloon there was a door ajar. By pushing it a little wider open, I discovered a range of apartments, with a light only in the furthest. What is to be done now, thought I within myself? Shall I go back, or take the liberty of marching forward, even to that chamber? To be sure, it was obvious that the most prudent step would be to make good my retreat. But curiosity was not to be repelled, or rather, to speak more truly, my star was in its ascendant. Advancing boldly from room to room, at length I reached that where the light was. It was a wax taper on a marble slab, in a magnificent candlestick. The first object that caught my eye was the gay furniture of this summer abode. But soon afterwards, casting a look towards a bed, of which the curtains were half undrawn on account of the heat, an object arrested my attention, which engrossed it with the deepest interest. A young lady, in spite of the thunderclaps which had been pealing round her, was sleeping there, motionless and undisturbed. I approached her very gently, and by the light of the taper I had seized, a complexion and features the most dazzling were submitted to my gaze. My spirits were all afloat at the discovery. A sensation of transport and delight came over me. But however my feelings might harass my own heart, my conviction of her high birth checked every presumptuous hope, and awe obtained a complete victory over desire. While I was drinking in floods of adoration at the shrine of her beauty, the goddess of my homage awoke. You may well suppose her consternation at seeing a man, an utter stranger, in her bedchamber, and at midnight. She was terrified at this strange appearance, and uttered a loud shriek. I did my best to restore her composure, and throwing myself on my knees in the humblest posture, "Madam," said I, "fear nothing. My business here is not to hurt you." I was going on, but her alarm was so great that she was incapable of hearing my excuses. She called her woman with a most vehement importunity, and as she could get no answer, she threw over her a thin nightgown at the foot of the bed, rushed rapidly out of the room, and darted into the apartments I had crossed, still calling her female establishment about her, as well as a younger sister whom she had under her care. I looked for nothing less than a posse of strapping footmen, who were likely, without hearing my defence, to execute summary justice on so audacious a culprit. But by good luck, at least for me, her cries were to no purpose. They only roused an old domestic, who would have been but a sorry knight, had any ravisher or magician invaded her repose. Nevertheless, assuming somewhat of courage from his presence, she asked me haughtily who I was, by what inlet, and to what purpose I had presumptuously gained admission into her house. I began then to enter on my exculpation, and had no sooner declared that the open door of the summer house in the garden had invited my entrance, than she exclaimed, as if thunderstruck, "Just heaven! What an idea darts across my mind!" As she uttered these words, she caught at the wax light on the table, then ran through all the apartments one after another, without finding either her attendants or her sister. She remarked, too, that all their personals and wardrobe were carried off. With such a comment on her hasty suspicion, she came up to me and said, in the hurried accent of suspense and perturbation, "Traitor, add not hypocrisy to your other crimes. Chance has not brought you hither. You are in the train of Don Ferdinand de Leyva. and are an accomplice in his guilt. But hope not to escape, there are still people enough about me to secure you. Madam, said I, do not confound me with your enemies. Don Ferdinand de Leyva is a stranger to me. I do not even know who you are. You see before you an outcast whom an affair of honour has compelled to fly from Madrid, and I swear by whatever is most sacred among men, that had not a storm overtaken me, I should never have set my foot over your threshold. Entertain then a more favourable opinion of me. So far from suspecting me for an accomplice in any plot against you, believe me ready to enlist in your defence, and to revenge your wrongs. These last words, and still more the sincere tone in which they were delivered, convinced the lady of my innocence, and she seemed no longer to look on me as her enemy. But if her anger abated, it was only that her grief might sway more absolutely. She began weeping most bitterly. Her tears called forth my sympathy, and my affliction was scarcely less poignant than her own, though the cause of this contagious sorrow was still to be ascertained. Yet it was not enough to mingle my tears with hers. In my impatience to become her defender and avenger, an impulse of terrific fury came over me. Madam, exclaimed I, what outrage have you sustained? Let me know it, and your injuries are mine. Would you have me hunt out Don Ferdinand and stab him to the heart? Only tell me on whom your justice would fall, and they shall suffer. You have only to give the word. Whatever dangers, whatever certain evils may be attendant on the execution of your orders, the unknown, whom you thought to be in league with your enemies, will brave them all in your cause. This enraptured devotion surprised the lady, and stopped the flowing of her tears. Ah, sir, said she, forgive this suspicion, and attribute it to the blindness of my cruel fate. A nobility of sentiment like this speaks at once to the heart of Seraphina, and while it undeceives, makes me the less repine at a stranger being witness of an affront offered to my family. Yes, I own my error, and revolt not, unknown as you are, from your proffered aid, but the death of Don Ferdinand is not what I require. Well then, madam, resumed I, of what nature are the services you would enjoin me? Sir, replied Seraphina, the ground of my complaint is this. Don Ferdinand de Leyva is enamoured of my sister Julia, whom he met with by accident at Toledo, where we for the most part reside. 3 months since he asked her in marriage of the Count de Poland, my father, who refused his consent on account of an old grudge subsisting between the families. My sister is not yet 15. She must have been indiscreet enough to follow the evil counsels of my woman, whom Don Ferdinand has doubtless bribed. And this daring ruffian, advertised of our being alone at our country house, has taken the opportunity of carrying off Julia. At least I should like to know what hiding place he has chosen to deposit her in, that my father and my brother, who have been these 2 months at Madrid, may take their measures accordingly. For heaven's sake, added she, give yourself the trouble of examining the neighbourhood of Toledo. An act so heinous cannot escape detection, and my family will owe you a debt of everlasting gratitude. The lady was little aware how unseasonable an employment she was thrusting upon me. My escape from Castile could not be too soon effected, and yet how should such a reflection ever enter into her head, when it was completely superseded in mine by a more powerful suggestion? Delighted at finding myself important to the most lovely creature in the universe, I caught at the commission with eagerness, and promised to acquit myself of it with equal zeal and industry. In fact, I did not wait for daybreak to go about fulfilling my engagement. A hasty leave of Seraphina gave me occasion to beg her pardon for the alarm I had caused her, and to assure her that she should speedily hear somewhat of my adventure. I went out as I came in, but so wrapped up in admiration of the lady that it was palpable I was completely caught. My sense of this truth was the more confirmed by the eagerness with which I embarked in her cause, and by the romantic, gaily coloured bubbles which my passion blew. It struck my fancy that Seraphina, though engrossed by her affliction, had remarked the hasty birth of my love, without being displeased at the discovery. I even flattered myself that if I could furnish her with any certain intelligence of her sister, and the business should terminate in any degree to her satisfaction, my part in it would be remembered to my advantage. Don Alfonso broke the thread of his discourse at this passage, and said to our aged host, I beg your pardon, father, if the fulness of my passion should lead me to dilate too long upon particulars wearisome and uninteresting to a stranger. No, my son, replied the hermit, such particulars are not wearisome. I am interested to know the state and progress of your passion for the young lady you are speaking of. My counsels will be influenced by the minute detail you are giving me. With my fancy heated by these seductive images, resumed the young man, I was 2 days hunting after Julia's ravisher, but in vain were all the inquiries that could be made. By no means I could devise was the least trace of him to be discovered. Deeply mortified at the unsuccessful issue of my search, I bent my steps back to Seraphina, whom I pictured to myself as overwhelmed with uneasiness. Yet she was in better spirits than might have been expected. She informed me that her success had been better than mine, for she had learned how her sister was disposed of. She had received a letter from Don Ferdinand himself, importing that after being privately married to Julia, he had placed her in a convent at Toledo. I have sent his letter to my father, pursued Seraphina. I hope the affair may be adjusted amicably, and that a solemn marriage will soon extinguish the feuds which have so long kept our respective families at variance. When the lady had thus informed me of her sister's fate, she began making an apology for the trouble she had given me, as well as the danger into which she might imprudently have thrown me by engaging my services in pursuit of a ravisher, without recollecting what I had told her, that an affair of honour had been the occasion of my flight. Her excuses were couched in such flattering terms as to convert her very oversight into an obligation. As rest was desirable for me after my journey, she conducted me into the saloon, where we sat down together. She wore an undress gown of white taffety with black stripes, and a little hat of the same materials with black feathers, which gave me reason to suppose that she might be a widow, but she looked so young that I scarcely knew what to think of it. If I was all impatient to get at her history, she was not less so to know who I was. She besought me to acquaint her with my name, not doubting, as she kindly expressed it, by my noble air, and still more by the generous pity which had made me enter so warmly into her interests, that I belonged to some considerable family. The question was not a little perplexing. My colour came and went, my agitation was extreme, and I must own that, with less repugnance to the meanness of a falsehood than to the acknowledgment of a disgraceful truth, I answered that I was the son of Baron Steinbach, an officer of the German guard. Tell me likewise, resumed the lady, why you left Madrid. Before you answer my question, I will insure you all my father's credit, as well as that of my brother Don Gaspard. It is the least mark of gratitude I can bestow on a gentleman who, for my service, has neglected the preservation even of his own life. Without further hesitation, I acquainted her with all the circumstances of my rencounter. She laid the whole blame on my deceased antagonist, and engaged to interest all her family in my favour. When I had satisfied her curiosity, it seemed not unreasonable to plead in favour of my own. I inquired whether she was maid, wife, or widow. It is 3 years, answered she, since my father made me marry Don Diego de Lara, and I have been a widow these 15 months. Madam, said I, by what misfortune were your wedded joys so soon interrupted? I am going to inform you, sir, resumed the lady, in return for the confidence you have reposed in me. Don Diego de Lara was a very elegant and accomplished gentleman, but, though his affection for me was extreme, and every day was witness to some attempt at giving me pleasure, such as the most impassioned and most tender lover puts in practice to win the smile of her he loves, though he had 1,000 estimable qualities, my heart was untouched by all his merit. Love is not always the offspring either of assiduity or desert. Alas, we are often captivated at first sight by we know not whom, nor why, nor how. To love, then, was not in my power. More disconcerted than gratified by his repeated offices of tenderness, which I received with a forced courtesy, but without real pleasure, if I accused myself in secret of ingratitude, I still thought myself an object as much of pity as of censure. To his unhappiness and my own, his delicacy more than kept pace with his affection. Not an action or a speech of mine but he unravelled, all its hidden motives, and fathomed all my thoughts almost before they arose. The inmost recesses of my heart were laid open to his penetration. He complained without ceasing of my indifference, and esteemed himself only so much the more unfortunate in not being able to please me, as he was well assured that no rival stood in his way, for I was scarcely 16 years old, and before he paid his addresses to me he had tampered with my women, who had assured him that no one had hitherto attracted my attention. Yes, Seraphina, he would often say, I could have been contented that you had preferred some other to myself, and that there were no more fatal cause of your insensibility. My attentions and your own principles would get the better of such a juvenile prepossession, but I despair of triumphing over your coldness, since your heart is impenetrable to all the love I have lavished on you. Wearied with the repetition of the same strain, I told him that instead of disturbing his repose and mine by this excess of delicacy, he would do better in trusting to the effects of time. In fact, at my age, I could not be expected to enter into the refinements of so sentimental a passion, and Don Diego should have waited, as I warned him, for a riper period and more staid reflection. But finding that a whole year had elapsed, and that he was no forwarder in my favour than on the first day, he lost all patience, or rather his brain became distracted. Affecting to have important business at court, he took his leave and went to serve as a volunteer in the Low Countries, where he soon found in the chances of war what he went to seek, the terminations of his sufferings and of his life. After the lady had finished her recital, her husband's uncommon character became the topic of our discourse. We were interrupted by the arrival of a courier charged with a letter for Seraphina from the Count de Polan. She begged my permission to read it, and as she went on, I observed her to grow pale and to become dreadfully agitated. When she had finished, she raised her eyes upward, heaved a long sigh, and her face was in a moment bathed with her tears. Her sorrow sat heavily on my feelings, my spirits were greatly disturbed, and as if it were a forewarning of the blow impending over my head, a death-like shudder crept through my frame, and my faculties were all benumbed. Madam, said I, in accents half choked with apprehension, may I ask of what dire events that letter brings the tidings? Take it, sir, answered Seraphina most dolefully, while she held out the letter to me. Read for yourself what my father has written. Alas, you are but too deeply concerned in the contents. At these words, which made my blood run cold, I took the letter with a trembling hand, and found in it the following intelligence. Your brother, Don Gaspard, fought yesterday at the Prado. He received a small sword wound, of which he died this day, and declared, before he breathed his last, that his antagonist was the son of Baron Steinbach, an officer of the German guard. As misfortunes never come alone, the murderer has eluded my vengeance by flight, but wherever he may have concealed himself, no pains shall be spared to hunt him out. I am going to write to the magistrates all round the country, who will not fail to take him into custody if he passes through any one of the towns in their jurisdiction, and by the notices I am going to circulate, I hope to cut off his retreat in the country or at the seaports. The Count de Polan. Conceive into what a ferment this letter threw all my thoughts. I remained for some moments motionless and without the power of speech. In the midst of my confusion, I too plainly saw the destructive bearing of Don Gaspard's death on the passion I had imbibed. My despair was unbounded at the thought. I threw myself at Seraphina's feet, and offering her my naked sword, Madam, said I, spare the Count de Polan the necessity of seeking further for a man who might possibly withdraw himself from his resentment. Be yourself the avenger of your brother. Offer up his murderer as the victim of your own hand. Now strike the blow. Let this very weapon, which terminated his life, cut short the sad remnant of his adversary's days. Sir, answered Seraphina, a little softened by my behaviour, I loved Don Gaspard so that, though you killed him in fair and manly hostility, and though he brought his death upon himself, you may rest assured that I take up my father's quarrel. Yes, Don Alfonso, I am your decided enemy, and will do against you all that the ties of blood and friendship require at my hands. But I will not take advantage of your evil star. In vain has it delivered you into my grasp. If honour arms me against you, the same sentiment forbids to pursue a cowardly revenge. The rights of hospitality must be inviolable, and I will not repay such service as you have rendered me with the treachery of an assassin. Fly, make your escape if you can from our pursuit and from the rigour of the laws, and save your forfeit life from the dangers that beset it. What then, madam, returned I, when vengeance is in your own hands, do you turn it over to the laws, which may perhaps be too slow for your impatience? Nay, rather stab a wretch who is not worthy of your forbearance. No, madam, maintain not so noble and so generous a proceeding with one like me. Do you know who I am? All Madrid takes me for Baron Steinbach's son, yet am I nothing better than a foundling, whom he brought up from charity. I know not even who were guilty of my existence. No matter, interrupted Seraphina with precipitation, as if my last words had given her new uneasiness. Though you were the lowest of mankind, I would do what honour bids. Well, madam, said I, since a brother's death is insufficient to excite your thirst after my blood, I will exasperate your hatred still further by a new offence, of which I trust you will never pardon the boldness. I dote on you. I could not behold your charms without being dazzled by them, and in spite of the cloud in which my destiny was enveloped, I had cherished the hope of being united to you. I was so infatuated by my passion, or rather by my pride, as to flatter myself that heaven, which perhaps conceals from me my birth in mercy, might discover it one day and enable me without a blush to acquaint you with my real name. After this injurious avowal, can you hesitate a moment about punishing me? This rash declaration, replied the lady, would doubtless prove offensive at any other season, but I forgive it in consideration of the trouble which bewilders you. Besides, my own condition so engrosses me as to render me deaf to any strange ideas that may escape you. Once more, Don Alphonso, added she, shedding tears, begone far from a house which you have cast into mourning. Every moment of your longer stay adds pungency to my distress. I no longer oppose your will, madam, returned I, preparing to take my leave. Absence from you must then be my portion. But do not suppose that, anxious for the preservation of a life which has become hateful to you, I go to seek an asylum where I may be sheltered from your search. No, no, I bare my breast to your resentment. I shall wait with impatience at Toledo for the fate which you design me, and by surrendering at once to my pursuers shall myself forward the completion of my miseries. At the conclusion of this speech I withdrew, my horse was returned to me, and I went to Toledo, where I abode 8 days, and really with so little care to conceal myself that I know not how or why I have escaped an arrest, for I cannot suppose that the Count de Polan, whose whole soul is set on cutting off my retreat, should not have been aware that I was likely to pass through Toledo. Yesterday I left that town, where it should seem as if I was tired of my liberty, and without betaking myself to any fixed course of travelling, I came to this hermitage like a man who had no reason to be ashamed of showing himself. Such, father, was the cause of my absence and distraction. I beseech you to assist me with your counsels. End of Book 4, Chapter 10.